Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today we're actually doing our weekly update of the Senate races. And again, for this semester, I am going to be doing all in the afternoon. Did I say semester? Whatever. Anyway, during the fall, I'm only going to be able to publish videos in the afternoons. Just because that's when I'm going to have time to actually sit down and record these things. And yes, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays are going to be kind of like a half podcast thing, so deal with that. And if you don't want to watch that, you don't have to. But anyway, let's actually get into this. And there's two races where I have where I've actually brought up the polls. The newest poll in question, because I wanted to review the methodology to look at what it does, and I'm going to explain why I'm going to do what I'm going to do with them, okay? So the first one we're going to go to is Florida, and I trust Florida Atlantic University. Some polls, if they show something that is much different than what we've seen in the past few weeks, I'll actually go into them and review the methodology, look and see why they got a different result than they did. And Florida Atlantic, I generally trust. And this is showing generally what we've seen, which is Rick Scott having the advantage in the majority of polls from about May onwards. And you could extend it, but at a certain point, this is about where the majority showing Bill Nelson ahead ends. And this is where Rick Scott's dominance begins. You know, you've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 polls and showing that 5, that's 6, and 1 showing a tie. 6 polls showing Rick Scott ahead before March, the middle of March, and then after the middle of March, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 showing Bill Nelson ahead compared to, I think that's at least twice that. 7 plus 6, so actually 13, a little bit more than twice that. And that's why I'm actually going to change this to leans, because we're seeing a continued trend of Rick Scott performing well in polling among likely voters, despite this being a Democrat year, and despite this being a very swing state. Rick Scott is not unpopular in Florida enough to actually match Bill Nelson, and he can self-fund. So I'm going to go ahead and give that to Rick Scott. Don't worry, I'll get to Arizona news real quick. The next state we're going to talk about is New Jersey. And we have a new poll from a nonpartisan pollster. We're going to ignore this Gravis poll that was commissioned by the Libertarian, because even though it shows something reasonable for what normally would happen in New Jersey, where the Republican would be pretty far behind the Democrat, about this much, probably a little bit more in reality, I don't for a second believe that he's actually polling at 7%. This is I'm going to go ahead and refer to this as the Libertarian error, which it could really be called the third party error. You're going to get about 10 to 20% of the population, depending on what year it is, and it's actually probably closer to 10%. You're going to get 10% of the population, no matter what's going on. If you offer them 3 choices, about 10% are actually going to take that third choice when given the option in a hypothetical poll, but then in the real race, they perform it half that at best. And chances are it's actually a lot less than half. If you look at Gary Johnson in 2016, for example, or Jill Stein, Johnson was not inconsistently polling at 10% throughout the entire race. And how much did he get? He got 4% total. Jill Stein was constantly polling at 5 to 7%, and I think she only got 2 or 1. So yeah, it's no. Did I talk about New Mexico? No, I didn't talk about New Mexico because there's not a new poll out, but I am excluding this because Gary Johnson is actually performing much higher. He's performing at about Ross Perot levels after Ross Perot dropped out and then rejoined. I would say Gary Johnson actually has a decent shot if he can actually actively campaign as well and make sure people remember that he was a somewhat successful governor of the state and definitely represents the state well. But yeah, so anyway, Bob Menendez is ahead of Bob Hugin. I finally learned how to say that correctly. It's not Eugen, it's Hugin. Though probably in New Jersey they say it without the H. That said, there's 16% undecided and there's a 6-point gap. I don't have very much confidence in this, but I'm going to obviously weigh this in favor of Menendez. It's a Democrat state in a Democrat year. Yes, he's got a lot of issues and a lot of baggage. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much that actually matters. He'll probably perform about 9% worse than he would have if he didn't have a scandal surrounding him. Okay. So now we've got a series of polls, or really just one poll from Texas. I had some problems with both this Texas Lyceum poll. This Marist poll, I'm less inclined to actually follow, but I looked at it. It was reasonable. I looked at it on my phone, but I actually pulled up the Emerson College poll because I was a little skeptical of that 38 to 37. And remember, we've got a ton of undecideds in that one. And I looked at it very short. And the problem is, so this is a Senate ballot. This is the governor's ballot. And if you look at this, we need to adjust Lupe Valdez. We need to adjust her total votes to about where Beto O'Rourke is, and we need to adjust Ted Cruz's to about where Greg Abbott is. Why? Because straight ticket voting is extremely popular these days. I'm slightly in disagreement with the methodology of this poll as well, because we go, the sample consisted of only registered voters, which in Texas is not a good way to do it, because, and especially, I would ignore any Texas polls that are all adults or only registered voters. I am going to slightly factor this in, obviously. I'm going to use it as kind of a barometer. If other polls show what we've been seeing, which is a Ted Cruz lead of between 6 and 11% or thereabouts, with this being kind of an outlier, I know that this poll probably had some a little bit of an error. However, if more polls with, in my opinion, better methodology, say a Gallup or a Gravis or somebody like that, Quinnipiac illustrates a similar dead heat with, and again, I'd also like to see a lot fewer undecided voters in both races. I don't think it would be unreasonable to say that, okay, this poll actually did match. But again, this is just registered voters. And the reason why I say that registered and all adult voter polls of Texas are not that good is because the actual voter turnout in Texas tends to be much wider than the registered voting pool, which is more white than the general population of Texas. Is that changing? Yes. Slowly, but it is changing. So yeah. That's why I'm not going to change Texas's rating despite the poll. And part of this is I don't like to be super aggressive because of one poll. I want to make sure that it's not an outlier before I adjust a race. And if I see a consistent trend, then I will. And it's actually why I haven't been looking at Missouri, is because all the polls for a couple months now have been internal polls or partisan polls. Now let's actually look at Wisconsin. So I saw this Marquette University poll and I was like, okay, and I saw this gap among likely voters, which I weigh more heavily than the registered voter polls. This is a 8% gap. However, this is a 2% gap among likely voters by taking out essentially only 200 people. That should tell you something. Likely voters are way more Republican in Wisconsin, it seems. But I decided to go towards and actually look at the release. Now, I haven't looked at what the exact questions are, but you are more than free to do that. And obviously you can go to Wikipedia and to Wisconsin Senate race, click on this link and you'll be sent here, and then you can scroll all the way down and go to that. But I wanted to see something. And this is the same one that also polled their governor's race. And then I look at this, and it says among likely voters, blah, 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 blah. 49% support Tammy Baldwin, 47% support Republican Leah Vukmir. Or Vukmir? If anyone's from Wisconsin, please tell me how to pronounce that name. While 3% say they lack a preference or do not lean towards a candidate. This means this is well within the margin of error, by the way. And amongst registered voters, obviously there's an 8-point gap between Baldwin and I'm going to say Vukmir for right now. And awareness has gone up, and that may have led to the increase of support for Vukmir. And I looked through, and I scrolled down past the issues that people thought were important. And here's the interesting thing. This is a 6% deficit. This is actually slightly less than Trump's deficit nationwide. And in July, his approval was actually below this. So he's made up a decent amount of ground, even though his disapproval rating has increased. And obviously, it's very partisan, as you can see, with Democrats being a little bit more unified. And, of course, how has Trump changed the GOP? Obviously, that has changed. Now, Now here's the interesting one. Does Trump keep his promises? And apparently 14% more people said that he has kept his promises than hasn't. And this is interesting. You see that most Republicans think he's keeping his promises. 23% of Democrats think he's keeping his promises. And more than half of independents say he's keeping his promises. So what does this tell us, the data analysts? Well, this tells us that there's a decent portion of Democrats who are probably going to vote for Trump. Because generally, you're going to think someone who you vote for or are inclined to vote for is keeping their promises. Or else you wouldn't be inclined to vote for that person. And if you don't think a person is keeping their promises, you won't be inclined to vote for that person. So this can tell us a lot, that maybe real support for Trump is potentially higher than this. Now, that's just me reading into the data. You can make your own conclusions about this, and I highly encourage you to do so, because I'm human, I make mistakes. And I want to hear your opinions of what this tells you specifically. That said, most people say that Trump doesn't care about them, and only about 40% of people actually say he does, but I've never really actually, and again, it's very highly partisan, with Republicans a little more divided than Democrats. That said, this has never actually really fit in with anything. And obviously this is extremely partisan, and here's the interesting. 61% think marijuana should be treated like alcohol. No, we're not going to look at the Foxconn stuff because... That said, they think 61% of people say it will improve the economy, so... which is interesting. Most people don't like the tariffs, and here's an interesting one. It seems Republicans still maintain that free trade mentality. And of course, the Mueller investigation is highly polarized. Now, I'm actually very happy. This is a much better way to present your data than that Emerson poll. And this is why I'm probably going to weigh this a little bit more heavily than I normally would, is because their methodology is very clear, it's very concise, and it's a good methodology, and they explain what their methodology is in this paragraph. They polled 800 registered voters, and 600 were considered likely voters. And let me find it. The partisan makeup of the sample, including those who lean to a party, is 45% Republican, 43% Democrat, and 11% fully independent with no lean. However, now this may seem like, oh my God, of course they're going to show more Republican support. You know, they polled more Republicans. But this isn't unnatural for Wisconsin. I've been saying that the state has been becoming more Republican over time. I think this fits in, and this is still exceedingly close. It's enough for 11% to actually make a difference. And the long-term previous statewide Marquette polls with 40,000 respondents is 43% Republican and 47% Democrat, with 9% fully independent. And of course, that includes lean. So their polls, they are adjusting it with the state rather than in trying to put what they think the state is doing. So they're actually trying to accurately predict the state. And the partisan makeup of the current sample, excluding those who lean to a party, is 31% Republican, 29% Democrat, and 38% Independent, which is representative about the nation as a whole, except maybe these percentages are flipped. Now, of course, this excludes the leans, But, and of course, again, they're slightly more Republican, but, you know, I think that's not unreasonable for Wisconsin considering the long-term trend of the state, and you can watch that in my future methodology video. I'm not going to include a link to it. You can easily find that on my channel. And the long-term trend and the long-term totals are 27% Republican, 31% Democrat, and 41% Independent. Again, indicating a shift towards the Republican Party. They're not making this change arbitrarily. I think they're making this to accurately represent the state. That said, I'm not going to fully rely on this poll, and I want to wait, but I think it's enough to put it, or at least, I don't remember if I had it in the leans column, but I think it's enough for me to consider it a lean state, where I'm not exactly 120% sure, but I think it's not unreasonable, you know. And, of course, I'm still giving them a decent edge to Tammy Baldwin. She's the incumbent, it's a Democrat year, and even that will win her seat if all goes according to plan, which it probably will. Incumbency rates are stupid high in America. Anyway, thank you so much for putting up with my rambling. I do want to talk a little bit about Senator John McCain and his passing this weekend. I didn't want to do a video or comment on his passing yesterday, plus I had a lot of stupid crap that I was doing yesterday. Someone wanted to meet me for brunch yesterday, so I did. And then I had some financial stuff I needed to take care of. And then I was doing league bowling, because I need to get out and exercise. But I'm not going to do any speculation on who's going to take his place in the Arizona Senate. Doug Ducey is going to appoint a person to fill his seat until a special election is held, which we don't know when that's going to be. And also because I want to try and respect John McCain's passing and give it time, essentially. Because it's kind of like, well, if all of a sudden, say, a senator died in a state that had special elections, I wouldn't even start talking about that election for a couple of weeks at the very least, because I don't want to immediately jump on the, oh my God, somebody died. I would feel very dirty, and I would feel like I was doing some form of wrong by using someone's death to profit, if that makes any sense. So that's why I'm not going to speculate on the now empty Arizona seat, and I probably won't talk about it for at least 2 or 3 weeks. Okay? So, anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take it easy. Have a nice day. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.